born in 1698, founder of the Chasidism movement, and also Walter Rebbe, who was born in 1745, and he's the founder of the Chabad movement. So you could say that night wall, which it is now, the 18th day of Elul, the sun is now gone down, is essentially the birthday of Chasidism. So it's a very, very fortuitous night to all be gathered here and celebrating such incredible Jewish student leadership and the meaningful leaders that we have here speaking to you as well. So let's make a toast to that and say hi.
Brochim habaim to our friends from Israel, and good evening to everyone. It's always an honor for me to participate in events of Shabtai, as I have been for 20 years. It's an honor for me also to stand here next to my very dear friend Scott Shay, and to my new friend Tal Keinan, and to a person whom I have revered for decades, Professor Stephen Smith. I thought it might be useful as a way of getting into the subject matter of the evening, and I'm going to let you guys know what the subject matter of the evening is in case no one's told you. Jews, Judaism, our individual stories in relation to Jews, Judaism, and Israel, and ways in which our stories might be relevant to you and the world that you've been born into as Jews, as Americans, as Israelis. We were born in different places and are of approximately the same generation. I hazard to say that the world that we were born into as Jews and Americans is different in some ways from the world that younger people in this room from America and from Israel were born into. And I want to just begin by saying a few words about that world and this world, and then a few observations about my own Jewish journey. And I hope it's helpful to you. I grew up in Fair Lawn, New Jersey, which was, during my childhood, overwhelmingly Jewish. I think that every adult male that I knew was either a veteran of World War II or a concentration camp survivor. I think already you can see that that's not the world that you were born into or grew up in. I will confess to something. I knew so many survivors growing up, and I saw so many broken people that I never felt any enthusiasm for the Museum of the Holocaust on the Mall, which I've never visited. I never watched the movie Schindler's List. These things were too real and too close to home, and I didn't want to revisit them, although I've read a lot about them. The reality and the human misery and the human triumph over that misery was enough for me. My father, whose Eisenhower jacket, you guys don't know what that is, it was a jacket that soldiers wore in World War II. I still have. It fits me, and actually I've taught wearing my father's Eisenhower jacket that he wore island hopping in the Pacific, preparing for an invasion of Japan. Of course, that invasion never happened. He ended up in Okinawa, which had been stripped of all of its vegetation and was nothing but mud because of genuine tsunamis, not figurative ones. They would go to sleep at night, and in the morning, the mud was everywhere. There would be people who were gone because their sleeping bags, together with they, would have just sunk into the mud. I think the experiences of war and of the concentration camps were brutal, and the sense of triumph that so many felt at the establishment of the State of Israel and the early history of the state was so alive and so much a part of what it meant to be a young Jew in the 1960s. Tremendous, tremendous love of Israel and identification with the Jewish people. This isn't something that can be translated. I can't transmit it to my own 4 wonderful children because they didn't experience it, and you can't transmit experience, or at least I can't. I felt a very strong attachment, and I still do, and it's primitive. And I don't feel a need to defend it, and I don't apologize for it. I feel a very strong attachment to Jewish history, to the Jewish people, to the Jewish state, to Jewish tradition, and Jewish texts. What happened to me when I arrived on this campus in 1977 is that I experienced something that I'm ashamed to admit to. So maybe we can forgive the 17-year-old that I was at the time for feeling this. I attended my first class at LC, and the class was Chaucer, Spencer, Milton, Donne, Pope, Wordsworth, Yeats. It was English 125. I don't know if it still has that number in the course book. And I, together with Yaleys of my generation and of earlier generations, had as our first assignment to memorize the prologue to the Canterbury Tales in Middle English. Juan de April with a shur de sota, the rucht of March hath panted to the rota, and baded every vine, switch liqueur, of which virtue and genre is the floor. I meet Yaleys of every generation, and they all know that, and I won't go any further than that, because probably most of the Yaleys in this room know that, or many. But what I experienced when I thought about the Shakespeare that I learned as a freshman, and the history that I learned as a freshman, and the Chaucer that I learned, and the way that it was presented, and the greatness of the teachers, and the overwhelming beauty, truth, and goodness of the tradition, was a bit of a sense of shame. I didn't think that there was anything in the Jewish tradition that I grew up in that could match the power and the eloquence of what I was learning and the texts and the people from whom I was learning those texts. And I struggled with that. And because I only have a few minutes, I will tell you what was a genuine turning point for me. I want to share it with you because I think it can be a turning point for you, or it can maybe stand for some other turning point that is available to you in an age when everything is published and it can be on your doorstep the same or the next day. There was a monograph written by a very prominent rabbi and published in the magazine Tradition in 1965 that was not available as a book until 1992. I was already in law school when this book came out. The title of the book is The Lonely Man of Faith, and the author is Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik. The book is less than 100 pages. I just reread it. The book changed my life. And I thought what I would do, rather than in the few minutes remaining to me, is tell you something about that book, what Rabbi Soloveitchik says in that book, and how that book connected me at the root with the beauty and the power and the eloquence of the Jewish tradition. The book is an extended midrash or meditation on 2 chapters of the Bible, the first and second chapters of Genesis. In those 2 chapters, creation unfolds. once in the first chapter and a second time in the second chapter. And what Rabbi Soloveitchik does in this book is first create a typology based on the Adam who was created in the first chapter, whom he calls Adam 1, and the Adam who was created in the second chapter, whom he calls Adam 2. And out of this typology, he constructs a view of human nature that is based upon Jewish tradition, and in my searching and reading, I have found nowhere else. And it seems to me deeper and truer to life than anything else that I have read. You can now acquire and have it delivered the next day 20 books by Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik in English. You can buy his commentary on the Chumash, the first 5 books of the Torah, and you can find much wisdom there. While I don't think there is genuinely a rivalry, I nevertheless will say I think the wisdom you'll find there rivals anything that you'll find in any tradition anywhere. So this is what Rabbi Soloveitchik does. He points out the following differences between the accounts of creation in the first and second chapters of Genesis. Adam 1 is made in the image of God. Nothing is said about how Adam 2 is made, other than that Adam is made out of the earth, Adamah. One is in the image of God, the other is made out of the earth. The second difference is that Adam the first is told to subdue the earth, to conquer the earth. Adam the first, Rabbi Soloveitchik says, is majestic man. And Adam the first is created together with Eve. And there you have the primary sociality, the first instance of the social, which is the creation of 2 human beings, the simultaneous creation of 2 human beings who exist in a relationship and who are told to subdue the earth. They name the animals. They take part in creation by mastering creation. That mastery, that Baconian desire to seek the betterment of man's estate through a conquest of nature, that's there in the first chapter of Genesis in the person of Adam the first. And it's a part of your nature. Adam the second isn't told to subdue anything. He's told to cultivate the garden and keep it. And the last distinction between Adam 1 and Adam 2 that I want to speak about is the fact that unlike Adam 1, Adam 2 is created without an Ezer Kenegdo, without a helpmeet, without Eve. Adam 2 is not only alone, he is lonely. You can be in this room, let's be clear about those 2 words. You can be with people and you can look at where you are outwardly and say, Tal is not alone, Scott's not alone, Harry's not alone, Stephen's not alone. Clearly we're not alone. We're together with all of you. Nevertheless, even as we're with you, we can be lonely because lonely is an inward state. You don't know whether I'm lonely, but you can tell whether I'm alone. What Rabbi Soloveitchik says is that the man of faith may never be alone, but to be a person of faith is to be lonely. Further, to be a human being is to be lonely. In just a moment more, what is introduced into Adam II's world as a consequence of that loneliness? First of all, God understands that Adam II needs companionship. None of the animals is an adequate companion. And Adam II doesn't subdue anything. God subdues Adam II And as he sleeps, he draws from Adam's side, Eve, and in the first words spoken by a human being, Adam names Eve the mother of all. Isn't that interesting? As soon as she's created, she's named as the mother of all living human beings, before she is a mother, in fact. So, together with the sociality that comes into existence when Eve becomes a companion for Adam in that second story, is this lingering sense of loneliness. It's a loneliness that Adam the first never feels. So if you ask yourself, what picture of man emerges from these two chapters? And I'm going to say to you that it's a deeper picture than I think you will find anywhere else. And you will also see points of contact with Hegel, the notion of recognition. Because there's a way in which Adam and Eve recognized each other in pursuit of conquering the earth and subduing it. You will recognize in Adam II a kind of Heideggerian sense, a sense that Heidegger had of being in the world in relation to other people and being aware of your mortality and of the birth of another human being, the creation of another human being, and the possible death of that human being, and a sense of time. Because now there's a time before Eve, and there's a time before Adam. You acquire a time awareness. All of this is in Rav Soloveitchik, and he talks about Kierkegaard, and he talks about Heidegger, and he talks about Hegel, and he talks about Nietzsche. But I want to say this to you. As you move through life, and as you find that sometimes you exist in a mode as chairman of a bank, as founder of a bank, as a member of an investment firm, as a law firm partner. Sometimes you exist in a mode in which your job is to be in the world and to work in the world and to accomplish things in the world and to be a part of a work community. And sometimes you exist in the world to be part of a covenant, to be together with other people who are lonely, to be together with other people with whom you can pray, to engage in activities that are affected by prophecy. Adam the first is visualized in that Tselem Elohim, in that image of God. Adam the second hears a calling. Adam the second hears. Adam the second is open to prophecy and prayer and a prayer community and a covenant community. And each of you, whether you know it or not, each of you is partly majestic and partly lonely. And that, as briefly as I can put it, is what I learned from that first taste of great rabbinic teaching and learning. And it's informed my quest. I was 32, that's 30 years ago. It's informed my quest since then to understand more deeply the Jewish tradition that connects every person in this room to every other person in this room, to all of the Jews who have lived before us, to all of the Jews who will come after us, to all of the Jews in America, to all of the Jews in Israel, and all over the world. And it's why I say to our Israeli friends, really and truly, Shalom Aleichem, Bruchim Habaim, Bracha V'Hatzlacha. You should have every blessing, and you should enjoy every success, and you should be proud to be a member of an ancient people whose ancient wisdom can help you move productively and charitably with accomplishments and success and with love through the world that God created for Adam.
So Harry talked about knowing survivors. Here's one thing that you need to know about me because it explains a lot. And it's led me to two of the central questions that I focused on in my life, which is that my father was a survivor. He was less than 70 pounds when he was liberated from Dachau by the American forces, and he was in an American field hospital for a year, being nursed back to health. Only a generous country would do something like that. And at a certain point, I thought, and he thought, that his ordeal started in June of 1941 when the Nazis came in and when he and every other member of the Jewish community of Svexner was handed over. And he grappled with that, and I talked to him about it over time. It's a central question. How did this happen? In 1940, the president of Lithuania said, there is no anti-Semitism here in Lithuania like in other countries. And he said, this country is based on social justice. Now, by the way, when I read that, and I'm thinking about what social justice, how social justice can be interpreted, well, he thought Lithuanian, and he came and visited Svexner. How did this happen? That was one central question. I'm going to just tell you the other question, too, and we're not going to have time to get into it, although it may dovetail at a certain point. But the other question that my father grappled with was, his father was murdered essentially in front of him. His brothers were murdered. His mother had died in childbirth, with his younger brother. She was already dead. But his aunts, his uncles, his cousins, everybody he knew, there were maybe 10 people who survived from Svexner, 15 people at most. Lithuania's Jews, 99% were murdered. Svexner was not unusual. And his question, by the way, was, he knew. You know, some people grapple with faith. My father didn't grapple with faith. He knew that it was miracles that got him to the other side of being liberated at 65 pounds from Dachau. He knew that if he were sitting where Tal was sitting instead of where I'm standing, or sitting over there, he knew if he were one step forward, one step back. He knew if someone else was one step forward, one step back, he would have been dead. I mean, that's how little the margin of error was. So he knew that God brought him to his liberation and to be in Chicago and have a son. He knew that was for some reason. But I will also say, he was also, and I would say this, and it's not necessarily always an easy thing to remember, and always not necessarily easy to remember how it was manifested, but he was also angry at God. Very profoundly so, because God, who had saved him, unquestionably had let his father, his brothers, his aunts, his uncles, his cousins not survive. And that's very difficult. And that is a large conversation. We may come back to that a little tiny bit at the end. But he knew he had a purpose in life. He knew he had something that he had to accomplish. He knew the Jewish people. He knew there was a reason for this, for his existence. And that always left a more than a foundation, an imprint on me, an imprint. And trying to figure out how June of 1941 came to be became one of the things that was a leitmotif in my life of thinking about that, because it didn't just happen. The Jews of Svexner didn't just turn over, the Lithuanians of Svexner didn't just turn over all the Jews. The Nazis didn't just come in. What happened was, sadly, retchingly sadly, is that the population of Europe, the population of Lithuania, the population of Svexner had been prepared with lies, with conspiracy theories, with slanders about Jews. When my father was growing up, before my father was born, I found this from archives, there was a blood libel about Jews in Svexner that caused a lot of Jews to be, it caused a pogrom, Jews to be harmed, killed. And then there was a second blood libel when my father was a young man, and luckily in this case the supposed victim turned up in health, so it ended. But from then on, Jews were treated in a very different way. Jewish shopkeepers, they had a little had on their sign, whatever their sign was, someone would put a little black smear of tar to say, these are Jews, don't buy from this store, boycott the Jews. I don't know where I heard that before. And don't interact with the Jews. Don't do a lot of things with the Jews. And they were prepared with conspiracy theories where Jews in Svexner were at one hand somehow supporting the fascists in Germany, and on the other hand, the communists in the Soviet Union. None of it made any sense. But June of 1941 would not have happened and could not have happened unless the local Svexner neighbors who knew the Jews, had lived with the Jews for generations, were convinced that these lies about Jews were true. That there was a conspiracy, that they were part of some evil cabal of Jews that were somehow manipulating the world. I went to a university, Northwestern, that as part of its motto, truth and searching out truth and making sure that one gets a truth. And I'm not going to read it to you, but I'm going to say Yale happens to be a university that goes by the motto of light and truth, although the Hebrew isn't exactly that. It's called light and truth. And yet, I'm really worried, more so than I have been at any time in my life, that we're losing a sense of truth. And if we do so, horrors will happen, because they have happened when we lose sense of truth. We want to embrace truths that we like, that are warm baths, that make us feel good. If this is a rarefied group, but if I were to take the country as a whole and say two things: Donald Trump lost the election of 2020, and there was no Russian collusion. If I were to say, now that would make 35% of the people wouldn't believe one of the statements, 35% of the people wouldn't believe the other statement, even though, of course, both are true. We are deeply, deeply losing sense of what is true for what we'd like to be true, for what our fantasy or our conspiracy theory for what we think is truth. In my book, and this is what really became, to a degree, my mission, Harry knows this, is to scrutinize and to encourage other people to scrutinize what's being said and passed as truth that are just lies. And in what I did in the book is show, I don't want to go through this all now, but show how conspiracy theories about Jews have become like common knowledge and common belief. There's a professor at Northwestern who wrote a book, The Hoax of the 20th Century, which is particularly maddening to me, who wrote a 450-page book or so, and heavy with footnotes, tenured professor at Northwestern, explaining how the Holocaust was made up. These tens of thousands of documents that depict the Holocaust, the minutes of the Wannsee Conference, all forgeries. The testimony of folks, of Nazis and others who confessed to murders, confessed to being perpetrators, said they were witnesses, said they were bystanders, confessed to all sorts of things. They were poor, innocent Nazis who were bamboozled by Jews, these crafty Jews, to say things that they would never have imagined doing. And by the way, on the left, it's just as bad. I show professors at Northwestern who are talking about all sorts of things. You have a professor who's written, a professor at Rutgers, who's written a book that says that, the startup nation? Well, actually, Israel is using its technology, its biotechnology, to hack the DNA of Palestinians to systemically starve them. It's engaged in rampant organ harvesting. Whenever a Palestinian thinks they're going to the hospital in a ambulance, they are being diverted to have organs harvested. This is written by a professor, full professor, with tenure, past peer review, published by Duke University Press, won Best Book Award from the Women's Studies Association. That's what it says. I can't make it up. Israel's using biotechnology somehow in the air with Wi-Fi and other things. I mean, it's voodoo. It's voodoo. It got someone tenure. And by the way, I talked about a professor on the right who's a Holocaust denier. Professor Saleta writes that the Nazi Holocaust was a precursor and part of a long-term plan by Jews to rid Palestine of its indigenous people. He writes that flat out. It's published by Temple University Press, also past peer review. These are lies. I don't need to tell anybody here these are lies, but they're preposterous lies. They're no less preposterous than the lies that were told in Svexner, Lithuania about Jews. And the smearing and the boycotts are no less than the smear on the shopkeepers, the Jewish shopkeepers' sides. So what I'm going to charge you with, I think, is we're all here for a purpose. My father thought he was here for a purpose. He was here for a purpose. And Zichrono Livracha, he accomplished a lot. You're sitting here in Yale, whether you're from Rehovot or New York City or LA. Somehow we're all gathered in this place. We're sitting in a place in a university that should be dedicated, and I believe is, to truth and light. And I think it's our mission right now, with so much falsehood, to have the courage to believe in truths and to find truths that aren't necessarily what we want to hear. You have to hear the bad news first. And I'm going to say one last thing, because I was saying this to Rabbi Hecht before, is that we also live in this strange age where sometimes the best liars stick only to the truth. And this is what you have to watch out for. You can use statistics, you can use facts, and you can narrate them. That's a new thing. And what I was saying to Rabbi Hecht was, if you read the third chapter, since Harry talked about the first and second chapters of the Bible, I have to talk about the third. We'll be here as we work our way through the rest of Genesis. I don't know what you've got cooking, Tom. But in the third chapter, that's the story of the snake. and Eve. Read that story carefully. The snake never lies. Doesn't say one falsehood. Manipulates the truth in a very interesting and devious way. And you have to look out for that too, because the snake is the first narrative writer. The snake says, did God say not to eat? Did God say that you can't touch the apple or the fruit? It's actually not an apple pear, but I'm going to super simplify for now. Did he say you can't touch that fruit? Did God say that? Well, no. God sort of gaslights this into Eve's mind. Well, if you can touch the fruit, you can eat the fruit. Meanwhile, God had said in the previous few verses, just don't eat the fruit. But by confusing it, the snake successfully creates a theory that sort of overtakes the truth and turns it into something else. I mentioned to Rabbi Hecht the article in the New York Times about the Hasidic schools. You can take a lot of facts and you can create a narration. And I'm going to leave you with this, because what I'm saying about being ruthless and having courage for truth will help you not only in your moral life, but in your business life. In 2008, 2009, 2010, there was a big financial crisis in the United States and across the world. It started with mortgages. It started with these things called CDS, called MBS, mortgage-backed securities, and hybrid securities, and subprime securities, and CDOs, and all this other stuff. And the fact of the matter is, it was all built on untruths. And anybody who could figure out the truth could figure out that there was a massive fraud going on here. And the few people who did came out okay. Indeed, some made money because they were willing to look at truths, and because everybody in the rating agencies, everybody in the investment banks all became attached to these falsehoods about these mortgages. And it blew up. And sooner or later, lies blow up. The nice thing about finance is sooner or later there's a reckoning of dollars and numbers. The bad thing about the rest of the world is sometimes there's reckonings in human bodies and all sorts of horrors, as I talked about before. So my charge to you, Harry left you with a charge, my charge to you is we're here for a reason. We're all here for a reason. We've all taken a journey up to today for a reason. Find your purpose. Focus on the truth, even when it hurts, even when you don't want to admit it, even when it'll make money, even when it'll cause people to be annoyed with you. And I'll leave you with the words of my friend Barney Frank. The best test of your authenticity is whether you're willing to piss off your friends.
Thank you, Shmuley, Toby, Alex, for inviting me. Thank you, Harry and Scott, for welcoming me to appear with you. Great to be with you all tonight. Please indulge me I'm going to speak in Hebrew for 30 seconds.
חבר'ה, באתי לפגוש אתכם. אני צריך לדבר באנגלית, כי אף אחד לא יבין אותי אם אני לא אדבר באנגלית, אבל אם אני אומר משהו שלא ברור, בבקשה, פשוט תרימו את היד. אני פה בשבילכם. I'll consider it a success from my perspective if I leave about half of you thinking after this evening about the following question. Should there be Jews? Should there be Jews? Whether you're Jewish or not, should there be Jews? Is it a good thing that there are Jews in the world? And there's a reason that I think we have to ask that question today, because I think for the first time in 2,000 years, that's not an inevitability. In fact, I would say it's likely that we don't have Jews, certainly not in the way we're constituted today, 3 or 4 generations from now. I'm going to tell you the way I answered that question for myself originally in order to just get you thinking about this, at least the way I did. And my answer was wrong. And I think this was the wrong way to think about it. But it led me down, I think, a good path of questioning. So I grew up in what I would consider a typical American Jewish home. Typical in that my 3 older brothers all married non-Jewish women. And that's the numbers, right? It's about 75% of us do that. And I didn't consider that any kind of a tragedy or bad news or anything like that. I love my sisters-in-law. I love my nieces and nephews. They're fantastic. They're wonderful. They're not Jewish. That's okay. I don't see that as any sort of a tragedy on an individual level. And I know some people might feel differently about that. I don't. But I do see the numbers. The numbers are very clear. If we continue on this path, it's over. It's over, right? Well, my grandchildren's generation, at least in this country, we could talk about Israel, in this country, will be about 5% the size of my generation in this country, which is way below critical mass for self-sustenance, right? Jews won't be meeting Jews at a rate that will be able to sustain us. And I grew up with 0 Jewish exposure, 0. I fasted on Yom Kippur. That was the only thing I did. That was my entire Jewish life, was fasting on Yom Kippur. Why? I don't know why. That's what we did. I grew up in boarding school in New Hampshire without many Jews around me. I never really considered myself any different. I look a little bit different from most of the kids that I grew up with, but that was about it. I never felt different. I've never encountered anti-Semitism in my life. That just was not a factor. I was American. And I started getting into Judaism in high school, and it was a Calvinist minister actually who kind of got me into it as a curiosity, not really as a kind of a profound search for my identity. But I very quickly got sucked in, and there's a moment that I write about and speak about where I was shown for the first time the picture of the boy in the Warsaw Ghetto who's being arrested with his hands up. Many of you will recognize it. If you don't, I urge you to just Google boy in the Warsaw Ghetto. It's the first image that'll come up in Google Images, which is a photograph that struck me, and immediately I realized I was seeing it the wrong way. In that the way that photograph is framed, you see the boy in the left side of the picture. He must be 6 or 7 years old. The picture of innocence with his hands up, and the Nazi troops on the right side of the picture with their guns pointing at him. And that juxtaposition of kind of raw brutality with pure innocence is what that picture begs. I didn't see it. I knew I was supposed to see it, but I didn't at all. I couldn't muster hatred or even anger for the Nazis on the right. I didn't know Jewish history well, but I knew enough to understand that they were just playing a role that somebody's played in most generations in the last 2,000 years. Somebody has worn that the uniform changes, but it's the same role that's being played. In fact, I saw them primarily as victims, not victimizers. What did strike me in the picture, and again, I encourage you, even if you've seen it, Google it and look at it again, is standing behind the boy is his family and probably his neighbors. This is 1943 is the final liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto. These are the adults, and they're also, their faces and their body language project shock and resignation. And I was angry at them. And that was what that picture provoked me. I was furious. How could you not have had a contingency plan, right? And it could be in Lithuania. This happened to be in Poland. It's the same story everywhere. You're not Poles, you're Jews. This is your story. This is what happens. How could you not have had a plan B? Because this child, who is your charge, this is your primary responsibility. You're his parents. It's to protect him physically. You've abrogated that. And as far as I know, everybody in that picture was dead in 2 or 3 weeks. That's probably exactly what happened to the people in that picture. It didn't take me long to think about, well, wait a second, what's my contingency plan? I've never thought of myself as anything but American. As far as I know, the people in that picture never thought of themselves as anything but Poles. I don't know. I'm closer in age at this point. I'm 16 or 17. I'm closer in age to the adults in the picture than I am to the boy. So who am I to be looking at this from the boy's perspective and be angry? What is my contingency plan? Which begs the next question, is America an aberration in Jewish history? Is this the end of Jewish history? Or is this just what it felt like at the ascendant phase of the Jewish cycle? And if you spoke to my grandfather, he would describe 1920s Germany more or less the way I felt in 1970s and 80s America. Totally welcome, totally part of the franchise, until we weren't. Now, I don't know the answer to that question in America, and if you put a gun to my head today, I'd say America is a special animal in Jewish history. I do think it takes a special society to welcome those people, to nurse your father back to health. I do think that that's the case, but I don't know. I don't think any of us knows for sure what's happening here. But that started a search for me, where I had to understand who I am. I don't know exactly what Judaism means, what my role in it is, but I do know that there's a 3,500-year chain that my 3 older brothers broke. And if I'm going to break it, I don't want to do it accidentally. I want to do it as an informed decision. Okay, I don't need to carry this torch anymore. That search took me to Israel. I did a summer program in Israel, kind of like what Birthright is today, similar sort of like a teen tour of Israel. And I saw people who were not afraid to ask the question I had asked. Because when I asked my friends at Exeter, my Jewish friends, is America a special moment in Jewish history? Is this the exception? People looked at me like I was crazy. Why are you even getting into that? That's just not something we think about. I couldn't see my parents about that. Nobody really wanted to entertain that question. And in Israel, I saw people who not only had the courage to ask that question, they had the courage to answer it with their feet. Not in a dorm room in Exeter, New Hampshire, but on the ground in Israel, and had the dignity to fight and pay a very steep price for their freedom and their dignity. And that was the moment that summer where I realized what that picture meant to me. It was shame. It was shame in the indignity of our accepting our fate for 2,000 years. And Israel to me was the romantic dignity. I fell in love. Israel, that was my experience with Israel. And very quickly I started learning Hebrew, started learning Arabic, started getting into the kind of Middle East and understanding what this was all about. I took a junior year abroad in Israel and had the opportunity to actually live there and start feeling a little bit more confident in my Israeliness. At some point, I had a kind of a moment of lucidity, of clarity, and I understood that if I went back to school, I would probably end up, in law school or on Wall Street or doing something fine, something great, fantastic. But I have a dream, and if I don't seize it right now, it's not coming back. This is my moment. And occasionally life, I think, grants us these moments of lucidity. And it's a gift if you can recognize them. I probably have had many that I didn't recognize. This one I happened to recognize, and I grabbed it. And I became a citizen. I made Aliyah. Finished my university a few months later in Israel, and got my draft papers, and ended up through a comedy of mistakes, very strangely, in the Air Force at the academy in Israel, expecting to be invited to leave any day. The days went by, I was still around. A year went by, I was still around. 2 years went by. 4 years later, I was leading people into combat, flying F-16s in Israel. That was a very intense experience, and my Jewish exploration ironically ended the day I made Aliyah to Israel, because I didn't have time. This was the most intense experience of my life, still to this day, was going through flight school in Israel and serving afterwards in the Air Force. No time for reading, thinking, Jewish thought, Jewish exploration, and I was a Jewish neophyte. And it was only about 10 years into that experience that I looked around and I realized, I don't know anything about Israel. Nothing. I don't know anything about Israel. Everybody I know is a kibbutznik from Kurs Tais, from flight school. That's it. It's a tiny, tiny cut of Israeli society. I don't know what it looks like to cross the street in Israel. I've never interacted with anybody from the Haredi community in Israel. Don't know anybody from the Haredi community. I don't know anything from most communities in Israel. And I don't know anything about Judaism. And yet, this was not the Peace Corps. This was not Teach for America. I had been in combat over 100 times. I had done things that I'm never going to be able to take back, never. Some of them I regret. This is not something I could say, oh, you know what, that was a wrong turn. I'm going to go back to law school now. My hands were dirty already. I was in the kind of the old joke about ham and eggs, where the chicken is involved, that the pig is committed. I was committed, and I had to. And this was a crisis, really a crisis for me in my life. I had to figure out what this was about. I had made very, very personally consequential decisions in the name of Judaism, a concept that I knew still almost nothing about. And in a very kind of backward way, started retracing my steps to that moment, looking at the boy in the picture in the Warsaw Ghetto. And this book is really about that, is what does this mean? And what I want to leave you with, I'm going to end in a minute. My parents' generation didn't have to ask this question. They didn't have to ask this question. In the United States, where they were completely accepted and fine and had a wonderful, wonderful life here, they were Jewish. And if you were not Jewish, you looked at them as Jewish. One of the things that's kind of most interesting to me today is that the Jews have become white. When I was growing up, Jews were not white. We were ethnic. We were an ethnic group, right? That perception seems to have changed, meaning we've become embraced by wider society. And if you look at it, I think it might not have escaped many of your attention. The concept of diaspora, tfutzot, is over. It's over as a useful model for describing the physical architecture of Judaism in the world. It's not diaspora anymore. 90% of us are here and in Israel. That's where the Jews are. The two most philo-Semitic, right, the most Jew-loving jurisdictions in certainly hundreds of years, probably 2,000 years. Right? You can be completely American if you choose to be as a Jew in this country, and obviously you can do the same thing in Israel. So for the first time, the vast, vast majority of world Judaism can treat Judaism as an option for the first time in 2,000 years. And what I say is, and that's obviously much more pronounced in the United States, but I would posit that the reason Israelis marry other Jews is because they don't know anyone who's not Jewish. That's why they're marrying other Jews. It's not because Judaism means something special to them. Not for everybody, but I think for the majority of us in Israel. By the way, and that's pretty well borne out, because if you look at statistics for intermarriage among Israelis in the United States, they're about 90%, much higher than they are for born American Jews. And again, I'm going to come back on an individual level. I don't judge it. I think it's fine. Frankly, in my experience, love is pretty hard. If you find love, grab it. Don't look at it too closely, because it's very difficult to manage that. So on an individual level, I don't fault anybody for the choices they make in love. But the numbers are leading us to extinction. And if it's important, might not be, but if it's important to us that there be Jews in the world, there's a few decisions that we all have to make as individuals and as a community. I'll leave you with the good news, which is I don't think we've had more agency as Jews, not in 2,000 years, in 4,000 years. This is peak Jew right now. We have never had more power and more agency and more ability to steer our fate. Part of that has to do with the fact that we are now concentrated, again, in two jurisdictions. There's almost no Jew in the world who lives where he or she does not want to live today. That almost doesn't exist today. Think of that. That's an aberration from the last 2,000 years. You can go wherever you want. You have total freedom. We have unprecedented prosperity, unprecedented political leverage in the world. If there's a time to make a move and really take our destiny into our hands, it's right now. But no one's going to impose that decision on us. That's something we're going to have to embrace ourselves. Thank you.
We have another speaker. Elchanan Felheimer is going to speak to us.
Oh,
טוב, אני אעשה את הטוב ביותר, אני אדבר באנגלית ומקווה שיהיה בסדר. Good evening, everyone. First, I apologize for my English. I still need to practice. Now that we are here and we have been in the Rabbi house, I have a good reason to go back and study in Israel that I will have a better English. All the leadership of the students in the state of Israel are here with us. Every academic college has a student union, and we represent a total of almost 400,000 students in the state of Israel. They are here right now. When Rabbi Moshe and Chilik and I thought about doing this journey, we had many debates, but after several days here in the United States, I can say with a full mouth that it was worth the hard work, the thoughts, and the money. We came here to learn about leadership, Tzionut, Yahadut, and Chabad. Every day we start really early and ended in the wee hours of the nights. During the journey, we also got to know the dear Rabbi Shmulik, who hosting us tonight. תנו לו כפיים. And this is an excellent opportunity to thank him for his investment, help, and many hours he devoted to us. This morning, we were at the Rabbi house, and it was one of the empowering moments we experienced. The Rabbi said that in the order to leader, you don't have to wait to become a CEO of company, member of Knesset, or any other point in influence. We just have to look at ourselves and say here and now that we are. We were also told about the rich guy who came to the Rabbi, and the last sentences the Rabbi said to him was, if you go home, look in the mirror, and nothing has changed, then it wasn't worth it that you came. I am sure that anyone who comes home after our journey and look in the mirror will see a different person. In the Chasidut said that in order for a person to work on his inner self, he must first work his outer appearance. I want to tell you that 5 years ago, I decided to go through significant change for me. I bought tailored trousers, elegant shirts, and suits. Of course, I'm still at the beginning of the road, but I can testify that it's hell. It is bending. This journey is the just of beginning of all of us. From here, we will grow and rise as high as possible with the help of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I will finish in a moment. I will with God. Yes. Okay. I will finish in one moment. But for those who don't know, today is the birthday of Ballan. Ballan would always talk about the fact that every person should always look inward and not outwardly. In today's generation, with TikTok and everything, it's very difficult. And that's exactly what Chabad campus is doing, helping us to look at our inner selves and the good in every person. A huge thanks to Rabbi Moshe Shilat, who built elite Chabad on campus in state of Israel, empowers thousands of students every day in the work, in the leadership, and doing good to each other. To Rabbi Chilik, who worked on this journey day and night, and all of this would not have happened if not for this adherence to his goal. A final thanks to dear Rabbi Shmulik for an exciting evening, good food, and the never-ending jokes.
Toby, אחרון חביב.
I think I'm going to stand over here. Tal, come sit down. You want to sit here? So I can see everybody. I know it's late. I'm just going to speak for a few minutes. Good evening. I have to have notes. Unlike my. Oh, okay. Good evening. Erev Tov B'Kulam. My name is Toby Hecht, and I am one of the directors of Shabtai. I first want to thank God, the master of all ceremonies, for bringing us together here tonight. It is an honor to be here with you all. I want to start off by thanking Alex for hosting tonight's event. I would like to thank Harry, Scott, and Tal for taking the time out of their busy schedules to share their wisdom with us. It was incredible. I want to thank Rabbi Moshe Shilat, head of Chabad in Israel, for bringing us this incredible group tonight. And of course, I want to thank my dear friends Moshe Rubin and Mendel Mushkin for helping to make arrangements behind the scenes. Tonight is really a celebration of unity and reflection. I'm going to echo some of the things our wonderful speakers have spoken about. It is by no coincidence that tonight also celebrates, as mentioned, the birthday of two prominent figures in Jewish history. Because in truth, they are the very reason we are here sitting in this room together among friends, both old and new. In the years 1648, 1649, infamously known as Taf B'Tat on the Jewish calendar, the Khmelnytsky massacres, the pogroms in Ukraine, viciously wiped out over hundreds of thousands of Jews. In the wake of such devastation and abuse, the Jewish community were battered, bruised, and depleted, the Jewish communities. The aftershocks still rumbled across Eastern Europe some 50 years later. In 1698, on the 18th day of the Hebrew month of Elul, which started this evening, as Alex mentioned, a man named the Baal Shem Tov, founder of the Hasidic movement, was born. His parents, Eliezer and Sarah, were God-fearing people, holy and righteous, living quietly on the edge of town in Akkon. Rabbi Eliezer was one of the 39 hidden tzaddikim, hidden righteous men that live in each generation. He and Sarah named their son and only child, Yisrael. When Yisrael was 5 years old, both Eliezer and Sarah passed away. On his deathbed, Eliezer told his son two things that would shape his life entirely and change the trajectory of Judaism forever. He said, quote, "Fear no one but God, and love every Jew with all your heart and soul, no matter who he or she is." Yisrael took the words of his father to heart and lived by their dictum every day of his life. He didn't have an easy life by our standards, but perhaps this only implies that we need to revisit the basis of our modern standards of a good life. He spent his life devoted to uplifting the tattered spirits of the Jewish people. As he traversed the Jewish landscape of hamlets and villages, both far and near, with an entourage of committed disciples, he reminded the people and reinforced the notion that God loves every single man, woman, and child unconditionally and indiscriminately. Through this unfailing belief, support, and love of another, he fundamentally bridged the gap between the simple man and the esteemed scholar, revolutionizing the status quo. Every person, no matter who they were, whether well-versed in Talmud or agriculture, could connect to God anytime, anywhere, always. The focus was on purity of faith and the sincerity of heart. And by revitalizing this foundational belief in Judaism, he stemmed the tide of loneliness and fear, rejuvenating a nation on the verge of despair. Before he passed away in Mezhebush, Ukraine, Rabbi Yisroel, the Holy Baal Shem Tov, left a legacy that had already begun to transform the world. 47 years to the day after the Baal Shem Tov came into this world, another great man was born. On the 18th day of Elul in 1745, Rabbi Shneir Zalman, known as the Alter Rebbe, the son of Baruch and Rivka, was born in Lyuzhna, a town in Poland. Baruch was a follower of the Baal Shem Tov, albeit more of a clandestine group called the Nistarim, the hidden. After a year without children, the pair visited the Baal Shem Tov for a blessing. He blessed them and said they would have a child within the year. That high holiday season, the Baal Shem Tov, known as the Besht, was recorded to have been radiating with an unusual joy even for him. Baruch and Rivka spent the holidays there in Mezhebush, receiving another blessing before departing at the end of the season. Rivka promised she would devote her child to spreading the word of Torah and Chasidism, the esoteric teachings of the Torah. Rivka, who made time to study Torah daily in privacy, went to a family member to learn what to pray and what to learn in preparation. Sure enough, as the Besh said they would, within the year Rivka gave birth to a boy on Chai Elul. Baruch and Rivka named their son Shneir Zalman, and they would raise him in his formative years under the direction of the Baal Shem Tov. Already as a young man, Shneir Zalman was proving to be a brilliant Talmudic scholar, nicknamed Litvak, i.e. a student of the Lithuanian yeshivas. He was a young married man when he had two options for continuing his studies, one Harvard and one Yale, as if. In reality, it was better. It was Mezrich or Vilna. He was told that in Vilna you'll learn how to study, and in Mezrich you'll learn how to pray, and he chose Mezrich. There he became the student of the crowned disciple and successor of the Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Dov Ber, known as the Maggid of Mezrich. Under the tutelage and guidance of his teacher, Shneir Zalman began to work on developing the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, which included working and teaching Jews of ordinary circumstances. Between his deep intellectual mind and his commitment to the path of his holy teachers, word spread about his greatness. You see, the Baal Shem Tov reintroduced the mystical in small doses through powerful stories and lessons from the Torah. His student, the Maggid, began to disseminate larger swaths of the esoteric to small nucleus of carefully selected students. Slowly, the concepts within Chasidus, which had until now been reserved for the academic elite, began to flow more broadly. Rabbi Shneir Zalman's focus was with a distinct emphasis on the intellectual dissemination of Jewish mysticism, the esoteric aspects of the Torah, the blueprint for Jewish life. His philosophy became known as Chabad, the acronym for Chachma, wisdom, Bina, understanding, and Das, knowledge. Chabad endeavors to understand the intent of creation, and especially our individual and communal purpose in the world. It relies on a meditative study of the metaphysical, spiritual, and mundane function, bridged by the fundamental recognition of godliness in everyone and everything. Less about disciples riding on the coattails of great rabbis. It was more about investing in the individual by inspiring faith and ability in oneself in search and service of God. By addressing this critical belief in the power of the individual, his philosophy zeroes in on the capacity for a transformative self. The multi-layered concept is illuminated in his magnum opus, the Tanya, which followed his code of Jewish law. This novel approach sparked great debate among Torah scholars across countries and centuries. Yeshiva institutions, of which the Alter Rebbe had been a star pupil, could not reconcile the wisdom of the great mystic he was destined to become. The flexible integration of simplicity and scholarship in service of God through a mystical passage was unconventional, and Chabad's innovative synthesis of the law and the soul, made available to every Jew, was threatening to the more rigid and reactionary style of service. Yet in spite of aggressive countermeasures, the life and teachings of Reb Shneir Zalman, the Alter Rebbe, persisted, bringing us to this house here tonight, 324 years later. I'd like to end off by saying to all of you, young, beautiful men and women with your whole life ahead of you, take heed of the profound messages of these two incredible legacies that intertwined not only because of their brilliant minds and life lessons, but through their humility and their love of humanity. Fear no one but God, and love every person, no matter who they are. Believe in yourself and know your potential. Spend your life living out that purpose that only you can do. Chasidus teaches that everything has a reason for being, from the thinking man to the leaf that rolls in the wind. The reason you were born into this world is because God decided the world needed you, each one of you in it. I'd like to end with the L'chaim. To you all, L'chaim. May you find your purpose in life with joy and live out your potential all the days